Okay, so you sent us this really interesting article, a commentary on Vollmeyer and Reinberg's research. It's by Markku Niemi-Virta, and it was from back in 2006. And it's all about motivation and self-regulation when it comes to learning, like what gets us going and keeps us going, and how we manage that process ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. Like at its core, what they're trying to do is understand how we tick when we learn. So Nimi article is like a deep dive into what Vollmeyer and Reinberg found, dissecting their research, especially how they framed this idea of motivation and how it connects to self-regulated learning.
Okay, so we're talking about how our motivation and our thought processes, like how we think about things, all kind of work together, and that drives how we learn on our own.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's really fascinating stuff.
So when Vollmeyer and Reinberg talk about this model, what's the core idea there? What are they really getting at?
Well, their main point is that, like, at the heart of it all, motivation is the driving force behind self-regulated learning.
Like more so than just being naturally smart?
Way more than that. It's about what keeps you engaged, what keeps you going. Not just your smarts or those cool study techniques you've picked up.
Hmm.
It's about that inner drive.
It's that desire to learn and keep pushing forward.
Exactly. You got it. So they've actually created this model. It's a way to break down the whole learning experience into stages.
Hmm.
First, you've got your initial motivation, what you bring to the table before you even start.
Okay.
Then, as you're learning, all sorts of other motivational stuff pops up, like how interesting you find the topic, how confident you feel about tackling it,
Right.
and then the cognitive things, like what strategies are you using to learn to understand the stuff. And finally, you get the outcome, how well you did, how much you actually learned.
So if you're starting out already pumped about the subject, that's going to affect how you go about learning it, right?
Totally. It's like your mindset acts as a filter for the whole experience.
Ah.
But they also point out that what happens as you learn is crucial too. Like the challenges you face, the feeling of progress, these things actually shape how that initial motivation turns into results.
So it's not just about starting strong, it's about navigating the whole journey.
Exactly. You nailed it.
So Nemi Verta chimes in with this commentary. What's his take on their model? Is he on board with all of this?
Oh, he's totally into it. He actually praises Vollmeyer and Reinberg for connecting those big picture feelings of motivation with those very specific things that happen as we learn. It's like they're taking something abstract and making it concrete. He sees this as a huge leap forward compared to older research, which just kind of labeled someone as a motivated learner without digging into the details.
Okay, so they're linking that general sense of motivation with those nitty-gritty details. It's like
Oh.
zooming in on the actual learning process.
Exactly. You're getting it.
So how did Vollmeyer and Reinberg actually go about studying this stuff? What methods did they use to get into the weeds of motivation?
Well, they mainly used two approaches. One was in controlled experiments, those very specific settings where they could focus on what happens when you're learning in the short term. Imagine scenarios with computer simulations or interactive multimedia learning tools.
Oh, okay, so like a learning lab.
Precisely.
Yeah.
A learning lab, yeah. They could really isolate certain factors and see what happens.
So it's all about control in that setting.
Exactly. Now, the other approach they used was to study what happens in more natural, real-world classrooms, looking at learning that takes place over longer periods of time, like observing students taking courses at a university.
Okay, so they're looking at both those controlled environments and real-world settings to get a more complete picture.
Exactly. You're catching on quickly.
But Niamaverta had some concerns about these methods, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
So what did he find problematic about those controlled experiments, those learning lab setups?
Well, his point was that while these experiments were great for precise measurement in very specific situations, some of the things they were measuring were just too tied to the specific task. He specifically pointed to time on task and strategy use as examples.
So if you're just measuring how long someone's clicking buttons in a simulation, that doesn't necessarily tell you how engaged they are, right?
Exactly. Like you don't know if they're deeply engrossed in solving the problem, just stuck and staring blankly. The time spent doesn't reveal the quality of that engagement.
Right, right. And what about the strategy use thing? What was the issue there?
Well, he argued that often the way they defined strategy use was too narrow. It focused only on the very specific actions needed for that task, like steps in a computer program. It missed those broader self-regulation strategies we use to make sure we're actually learning. You know, things like setting goals, checking if we understand, or deciding when to go back and review something.
Right, so it's like they were measuring the mechanics of the task, but not the thinking behind it.
Yeah, exactly. He felt they needed a more nuanced way to look at these things to really understand how people self-regulate when they learn.
So the lab setting gave them control, but maybe they missed some of the deeper, more strategic stuff happening in the learner's mind.
Precisely.
And then when it came to the classroom settings, he mentioned a lack of coherence. What did he mean by that?
So in those classroom-based studies, his concern was about measuring different things at completely different times. For example, they might assess a student's general competence in a subject before the course even starts, then measure their feeling of flow, that being in the zone feeling during a single class, and then weeks later look at their final grade.
I see. So it's like trying to connect those dots across such different points in time might be tricky.
It's a real challenge. Niemerverde questioned whether you could really draw strong conclusions by linking these different measurements taken so far apart. For example, can we really say that experiencing flow in one class significantly affected their final exam weeks later? It might just be that some students are naturally more inclined to get absorbed in things, regardless of the specific situation.
Right. It's like trying to judge someone's entire personality based on a 5-minute interaction. You might get a glimpse, but it's not the whole picture.
Exactly. A perfect analogy.
And this leads us to what Nimi Verda considered a major point: the lack of comparable measurements taken repeatedly over time. This applies to both types of studies.
Exactly. He noticed that the research was more focused on predicting outcomes and seeing if the connections between different measurements stayed stable. But what it didn't do was really look at how motivation itself changes during a learning experience. It's like taking snapshots at the start and finish, but missing the whole movie in between.
I see. So it's about understanding the process, not just the before and after.
Exactly. He argued that we need to understand how motivation unfolds over time, how it shifts and changes as we learn.
And he brought up different types of change, didn't he?
He did, yeah. He talked about gamma change, which is a fundamental shift in how you understand what motivates you, like your whole perspective might change. Then there's alpha change, which is a change in the level or intensity of your motivation, like your interest might go up or down. And finally, there's normative stability, which looks at how your motivation compares to others over time. So like, do you stay more motivated than your peers, less, or does that ranking change?
Wow. So it's not just about how much you're motivated, but about what motivates you and how that evolves. It's like the nature of your motivation can shift as you're learning.
Exactly. That's what he was getting at.
That's really interesting. And this is where he suggests using more advanced statistical tools like latent growth curve modeling, right?
Yes. He explained that if we take more measurements repeatedly over time, we can use methods like latent growth curve modeling to map out how motivation changes, not just at the beginning and end, but throughout the whole process.
So it's like tracking those ups and downs, those shifts in motivation as they happen.
Precisely. It gives you a much richer, more dynamic picture of how people actually learn and self-regulate. And he brought up a study he worked on with a colleague, Topola, where they used latent growth curve modeling to examine how interest and self-efficacy, that's your belief in your ability to succeed, changed as people worked on a computer simulation task.
Okay, so they're actually looking at those changes as they unfold. What did they find?
Well, they found that as people made progress in the simulation, their self-efficacy generally increased. And here's the really cool part. Increases in self-efficacy were linked to increases in interest.
Oh, wow. So feeling more competent actually made them more interested. It's like success breeds a desire to learn more.
Exactly. And both that initial self-efficacy and how their interest grew early on were strong predictors of how much they learned, even after accounting for their prior knowledge.
That's fascinating. It shows how those feelings, self-belief, and interest are all intertwined and how they can influence each other as you learn.
Absolutely. And Nami Verta stressed that these interconnected changes, these things happening during the learning process itself, would likely been missed without those repeated measurements and more sophisticated analysis.
Makes perfect sense. It highlights the value of seeing learning as a journey, not just a destination.
Yes, exactly.
Now, Niemöller also delved into some more technical aspects of how Vollmeier and Reinberg analyzed their data using regression models. What were his thoughts there?
So he pointed out that although Vollmeier and Reinberg did use structural equation modeling, a more advanced technique than simple regression that can account for measurement error, they sometimes simplify their approach. For example, they might combine scores from multiple questionnaires into one overall score and then treat that as a perfect measure, ignoring any potential for error.
So it's like taking an average of several different ratings and assuming that average perfectly captures the thing you're trying to measure.
Precisely. But structural equation modeling lets you factor in that our measurements aren't always perfect, leading to more accurate and reliable results.
Mm.
He suggested that larger sample sizes and using multiple ways to measure the same thing would make the analyses even stronger.
Okay, so more data and multiple perspectives help paint a clearer picture. Makes sense. Now, despite these technical criticisms, Nimi Verta seemed quite positive about Vollmeyer and Reinberg's work overall, right?
Oh, absolutely. He made it clear that he saw their work as super valuable, a really important contribution. He praised their systematic approach to understanding how students learn in different situations. He felt their research program was a great example of how to build knowledge step by step in a logical and coherent way.
And he was particularly excited about their research in classroom settings.
Yes, exactly. He believed that studying learning in those real-world classrooms is essential for understanding how these motivational processes actually play out in the messy reality of education. And he even offered some really concrete suggestions for how future research could build on their work.
Like what directions did he suggest?
Well, he really hammered home the importance of those repeated measurements to track those changes in motivation as they happen. He also suggested trying to more closely connect those in-the-moment measures of motivation and flow with what's actually happening with performance at the same time.
Okay, so it's about linking those internal experiences with external outcomes in real time.
Exactly. And he also advocated for using a broader range of ways to measure learning and performance, going beyond just formal tests. He suggested considering students' own evaluations of their progress, their understanding, and even their observable behavior like are they engaged, are they committed to the task. He acknowledged that making these changes would be complex, but ultimately crucial for really getting to grips with the dynamic nature of self-regulation in learning.
Yeah, it sounds like we need to be more creative and more thorough in how we measure and study these things. It's not just about the endpoint, it's about the whole journey.
I agree.
So the big takeaway for us from Vollmeyer and Reinberg's research is that how motivated you are initially, combined with what happens as you're learning, all comes together to affect how well you do. But then Niemi Voda takes this a step further. He really emphasizes that your motivation and your ability to self-regulate aren't fixed. They change and develop as you learn. And the way we study these things has to capture that. It's not just about the before and after, but about all those moments in between.
That's a really key point. And it actually brings up something interesting for you to think about. Nivedita emphasized how much motivation can change during a task. So how might consciously paying attention to your own feelings, your interest, how challenging you find something, your sense of progress while you're learning actually impact your experience and your performance? Could this kind of self-awareness be a practical way to improve your own self-regulation?
That's a great question. It makes you wonder if simply being more aware of how you're feeling as you learn could actually help you learn better.
Absolutely. And, we've only just dipped our toes into this research today. The concepts of initial motivation, those influences from your specific situation, the feeling of flow, and especially the need to track changes over time are all super fascinating areas for you to explore if this has piqued your interest. You might find it really cool to dig into Vollmeyer and Reinberg's work directly, or maybe even research latent growth curve modeling and educational psychology. There's a whole world of knowledge out there.
Absolutely. I'm sure our listeners will find lots to explore based on today's discussion. It's been really thought-provoking. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. It's always great to chat about this stuff.